When Iceborne dropped for Monster Hunter World, I couldn't believe how many monsters, new and old, came to Monster Hunter World. So I decided to list out every monster that's in the game. Every large monster, at least. Sorry to all you Ride or Die Wiggler fans. If you want us to cover the small monsters too, let me know, and be sure to subscribe to the leaderboard. Great Jagras. The Great Jagras controls its pack, but it can't control its appetite. It'll swallow its prey whole, causing its stomach to expand. If you hit its belly enough, the Great Jagras will spit up its food and be in a weakened state. Puke Puke. The Puke Puke stores poison in its body and spews it out as a toxic sludge. With its massive tongue, it tries to eat whatever is in its path to fill its body with even more poison. Coral Puke Puke. This Puke Puke variant is exclusive to the Coral Highlands, and it stores water from all the plants it eats, and then shoots that water back at you. It's not poisonous, but the Coral Puke Puke is much more dangerous. Tobi-Kadachi. As the Tobi-Kadachi flies through the ancient forest, its fur accumulates more and more static electricity by brushing against all the plants. Aim for its tail and don't let it get a full charge. Thunder is always dangerous, but the Viper Tobi-Kadachi can poison you with its tail and paralyze you with a bite from its fangs for a deadly status combination. Anjanath. Anjanath looks like a furry, fire-breathing T-Rex, but it does have a weakness. Once it's enraged, a crest appears on its nose that opens it up to serious damage. It's got wings too, but they're even more obvious on its subspecies, the Fulgur Anjanath. Aside from the thunder, the biggest difference with this subspecies is its enraged state. Instead of a head crest, Fulgur Anjanath sprouts these striped wings that are susceptible to ice damage. Barroth. Barroth loves eating ants, but it'll squash you like a bug if it sees you. This brute wyvern coats itself in mud for some extra protection, but you can clean it off with water weapons or some puddle pods. Kulu Yaku. The Kulu Yaku may not look like much, and it's not much. It steals eggs from Rathian nests, and it'll toss boulders at you to save its feathers. No worries though, you can just disarm it by smacking the rock out of its arms. Gyratotus. Just like the Barroth, the Gyratotus protects itself with mud armor, but again, you can just wash it off to expose the monster's hide. Navigating the mud can be tricky, but just bring a water mantle and you'll have no issues. Diablos. The Diablos is no joke. This flying wyvern can stun you with a massive roar and then charge you with its even more massive horns. It'll burrow underground too, but a quick screamer pod will stop it in its tracks and force it topside. It just looks like a new paint job, but the Black Diablos is actually a female Diablos in heat, so, as you can imagine, it's much more aggressive. Thankfully, that Screamer Pod trick is just as effective. Rathian. She flies, she roars, and she's got poison in her tail, so the Rathian is a jack of all trades. Can't find her? Go to her nest and swipe one of her eggs. She'll make a beeline to your location to get revenge. She's got a couple different variations too. Like the pink Rathian has some tougher armor, and it's more difficult to avoid its poison tail. Meanwhile, the gold Rathian is a nightmare. Her scales are stronger, her fire is hotter, and she will not give you a second to breathe. Rathalos. The king of the skies and the male counterpart to the Rathian, the Rathalos hates to be on the ground. It'll try to swoop down and poison you, but a well-placed flash pod will knock it out of the sky. The Azure variant flies around even more, so you'll have to be especially careful with those flash pods. As for the Silver Rathalos, the best advice I can give you is to buckle in and use water weapons. It's got the same hellfire as the Gold Rathian, so best of luck. Tsitsi Yaku. Okay, so the Tsitsi Yaku is like a cross between a velociraptor and one of those old-timey flashbulb cameras. The organ on its head can stun hunters with a bright light, but you can dodge it by avoiding its MGS-style cone of vision. Of course, you can also just break it off, and the Tsitsi Yaku loses its flashing abilities. Paolumu. The Paolumu floats through the Coral Highlands eating other monsters' eggs. Even though its mane is soft and puffy, especially when it's inflated, its tail is tough and leathery. If the Paolumu's wind doesn't blow you away first, avoid hitting the tail, you'll just bounce right off of it. As much as the Paolumu looks like a pillow, the Nightshade Paolumu will actually put you to sleep. This subspecies bellows a sleeping gas from its throat that will knock you out if you're not careful. Legiana. The Legiana is all about ice and wind. It uses the cold gale it creates to prevent its prey from escaping, which is usually these winged drakes called Raffinos. Shrieking Legiana. As far as variant species go, the Shrieking Legiana doesn't vary much. It's pretty much a colder, louder version of the Legiana. I know it just looks like a frosted Legiana, but seriously, the roars on this thing will ruin your day. Great Gyros. Like the Great Jagras, the Great Gyros has a squad to back it up. Thing is, the Gyros gang actually has power in numbers. If you don't thin the herd, Great Gyros and co will constantly paralyze you, turning an easy fight into a chore. Radaban. The Radaban rolls around the Rotten Vale, picking up all kinds of bones to use as armor. Breaking that stuff off is super easy, but just watch out for the sleeping gas it spews every once in a while. Odogaron. First and foremost, the Odogaron is fast. If it swipes you with its claws, it can inflict bleeding. Good luck curing it though, because this thing will be on top of you before you can even scarf down a well-done steak. Ebony Odogaron. Ebony Odogaron is basically the same monster, but with dragon element. That doesn't sound fancy, but slapping Dragon Blight onto an already tough monster shows how cruel nature can be. Dodogama. The Odogarons eat anything, but the Dodogama mostly eats rocks. The monster's spit turns those rocks into explosives that it can hurl at you, but it takes time. Hitting the rocks while they're in the Dodogama's mouth will detonate them, causing some serious damage. Uragan. Uragan also eats rocks, but its mouth is well protected by that massive jaw. Like the Radaban, this brute wyvern rolls around and even drops some explosive rocks. If you happen to topple it over, you can mine its back. Lavasioth. After swimming through molten lava, the Lavasioth pops up covered in the stuff. Once the lava cools, it forms a protective shell which you'll need fire damage or torch pods to soften up. Of course, you could also wait for the monster to dive back into the lava. Basiljuice. The Basiljuice is the B-52 bomber of the New World, dropping explosive scales all over the place. Even worse, this thing always shows up uninvited when you're hunting a different monster. Just fling a dung pod into its face, hopefully it'll take the hint and leave you alone. The seething Basiljuice feels pretty familiar, but it sprinkles Blast Blight, making all of its explosions that much deadlier. Zora Magdaros. The Zora Magdaros is a literal walking mountain, complete with farmable geodes. Aside from the Ballistae, Cannon Fire, and the Dragonator of course, the only real way to hurt this massive Elder Dragon is to attack the magma cores on its body. Of course, you'll still have to be on the lookout for the Nergigante. Elder Dragons are always tough, but Nergigante eats other Elder Dragons. The spikes on its body look dangerous, but you should try and break them off. If you take too long, they'll turn black and be so tough that you'll just bounce right off of them. Supposedly, the Ruiner Nergigante is a battle-weathered version of the original Nergigante, but it's not too bad. Even so, it can inflict bleed, and its spikes will get tougher on their own as the monster grows weaker. Kushala Daora. The Kushala Daora shoots wind, it creates tornadoes, but worst of all, it coats itself in wind to stay safe. Windproof armor and hunting horns will help, but even that won't work when this Elder Dragon is enraged and its gusts turn black. Teostra. Getting close to the Teostra is tough. When it's not covered in fire, it shakes an explosive powder off of its scales that will inflict Blast Blight. When it starts flying, that means it's charging a devastating supernova attack. The Lunastra is the female version of the Teostra, but she doesn't have Blast Blight. Instead, she covers the whole area with blue flames. They won't stagger you, but they will do damage over time, so bring a fireproof mantle. Val Hazak. Effluvium is all over the Rotten Vale, but the Val Hazak thrives in it. Even worse, it weaponizes the effluvium against unprepared hunters. Val Hazak is surrounded by the stuff, but it'll even turn it into a giant beam of miasma, and it probably smells. And I'd bet that the Black Veil Val Hazak smells even worse. It's covered in toxic spores, so you can't even hit it without catching a face of effluvium. Kirin. I know, it just looks like a little unicorn, but any hunter will tell you how dangerous the Kirin really is. When pushed too far, it'll use its horn as a lightning rod and supercharge itself with even more lightning powers. Xeno'jiiva. Okay, in a game that's entirely boss fights, the Xeno'jiiva is the final boss. Of the base game, at least. It's big, it's fast, and it fires laser beams. Once it starts flying around, you better be ready to shoot it down with your slinger or start running. Deviljho. Ah yes, the dreaded pickle. The Deviljho will never stop eating, and will immediately pick a fight with other large monsters to whet its appetite. It'll even grab fanged wyverns like the Tobi-Kadachi in its jaws and use them as weapons. Like the Basiljuice, you can expect it to pop up whenever it's the least convenient. If the normal Deviljho is a pickle, then this variant is a pickled habanero. It's basically a permanently enraged Deviljho with all the dangers that brings, but at least it's more vulnerable to status attacks. Kulve Taroth. The Kulve Taroth is massive, so there's a lot to hunt, but those golden horns are the grand prize. Trouble is, you need a whole team-based siege to pull it off. Careful use of falling rocks and cannon fire will help. Banbaro. With its two massive horns, the Banbaro barrels through any trees, and hunters, that are in its path. This brute wyvern will dig up boulders to hit you with, and those boulders will have different effects based on the terrain you're fighting on. Beototus. The Georototus swims through mud, the Lavasios swims through lava, and then the Beototus swims through the snow. These piscine wyverns are pretty predictable. Its legs are the weak point, so a quick sonic bomb will send it flying out of the snow for you to do some good damage. Nargacuga. Nargacuga has these sleek black wings, but don't expect it to fly around. It'll dart across the ground, and it is fast, especially when it's enraged and its eyes glow red. The feathers or scales or whatever on its tail are super sharp, and they'll inflict bleeding if they hit you enough. Barioth. The Barioth is like the Nargacuga's bigger, colder cousin. It's also incredibly fast, but it'll slow you down with its ice abilities. Aside from just shooting ice from its mouth, the Barioth can briefly create frozen whirlwinds, kinda like the Kushala Daora. Tigrex. I always say Tigrex, but some people say Tigrex because it sounds kind of like T-Rex, but I think it looks like a tiger, so I'm going with Tigrex. If you think it's Tigrex, then good for you. I'm Not saying you're wrong, but... When other monsters roar, it's inconvenient, but the Tigrex roar will actually damage you if you're too close. And it's not like you can keep your distance. The Tigrex won't give you a minute to breathe while it's constantly charging at you. Traps will be your best friend in this fight. Brute Tigrex. Calling the Brute Tigrex a variant is generous. It's pretty much the same monster, just bigger and more aggressive. Just like the original Tigrex, the Brute variant can throw rocks, so watch out for fire and ice balls depending on where you're fighting it. Glavenus. Just one look at the Glavenus and that massive tail sticks out. Aside from its tail basically being a giant sword, Glavenus can sharpen it and turn it into a giant flaming sword. It can be tricky to reach its head, but once you knock it over, go for its glowing throat. Acidic Glavenus. For the Acidic Glavenus, you don't have to worry about fiery explosions. Instead, the crystallized acid on its tail will inflict you with defense down. The tail does more damage when it's sharpened, so make sure you heal yourself so you don't get instantly carded. Brachydios. The Brachydios is as dangerous as it is gross. It covers its arms in its own spit, but that spit also explodes. It'll also leave puddles of that slime around, so watch where you step if you don't want to get blown up. Yangaruga. Preparation is key for any hunt, but it's especially important for the Yangaruga. It roars, it flaps its wings, it's got a poison tail, and wow, does it hit hard. You can slow it down with traps, just as long as they're shock traps. Pitfalls will not work when it's enraged. And the scarred Yangaruga is even tougher. It's apparently tempered by past failed hunts, but you can still wail on its head and exhaust it before it gets too aggressive. Zinogre. After charging up enough, the Zinogre basically goes Super Saiyan and gets super aggressive. But before it gets to that point, you can smack it on the head and interrupt its charging. And hey, while it's knocked over, you can catch Fulgur bugs from the fur on Zinogre's back. The Stygian Zinogre doesn't have Fulgur bugs, but it does have Dracophage bugs. You can farm them off its back, but be careful. This monster shoots those bugs around its body, and they'll inflict Dragon Blight. Rajang. Okay, I know I said that the Zinogre goes Super Saiyan, but the Rajang has surpassed a Super Saiyan. Even without its lightning beam that comes from its mouth, this fanged beast is dangerous with its fists alone. Oh, and apparently this thing eats Kirins. Yeah, Rajang was eating Elder Dragons before Nergigante was ever a twinkle in Capcom's eye. Velkhana. It's the flagship monster of Iceborne, so I don't have to tell you that Velkhana uses lots of ice. Legends say this Elder Dragon is able to control cold itself. The Velkhana will sometimes create ice platforms which smart hunters can use to get a mount. Namiel. Once all that ice melts, the Namiel is the Elder Dragon that rules the water. This vampire squid-looking thing leaves puddles all over the place and inflicts water and thunder. Fighting this thing is like fighting a toaster in a bathtub. Shara Ishvalda. When you first see the Shara Ishvalda, it's a massive, four-legged boulder golem. But after enough hits, and some explosives like blast weapons, that rocky armor falls away and reveals its true form, Safi'jiiva. You remember the original final boss, Xeno'jiiva? Well, turns out that thing was just a baby, and the Safi'jiiva is that monster all grown up. This Elder Dragon has a flaming super move that'll one-shot any hunter caught in the blast. You can't even Superman dodge through it. All you can do is take shelter behind some rocks. That's all the monsters from, Monster Hunter, but I gotta give a shout out to the crossover monsters too. Behemoth. Look, I haven't played Final Fantasy XIV, and I'm all for wacky collaborations, but the Behemoth sucks. This thing casts spells out of nowhere and summons meteors. Look, if you're trying to fight this thing, go look up some tips from like Arix or something. Leshen. If you've played The Witcher, then you get why I think Monster Hunter could take a cue from the Leshen. This thing controls lesser monsters like Revelures and Jagras to attack. It also uses magic to summon roots and keep hunters away. Of course, all the cool ideas introduced with the Leshen stop feeling so cool once you tackle the ancient Leshen. Like the Behemoth, you'll need a well-coordinated team effort to stand a chance against this thing. So I don't know what the next collab is gonna be, but I do know we can look forward to that new black and green Elder Dragon. What are some classic monsters you want to see come back? My fingers are crossed for the Nibblesnarf. Anyway, my name is Dan, reminding you to eat before every hunt, and subscribe to the leaderboard. All players are welcome, especially Hunting Horn players. All 5 of you.